Winston Leonard Spencer Churchill was born on November 30th, 1874, at Blenheim Palace, the ancestral seat of the Dukes of Marlborough, whose victories against the French in the early 1700s had enshrined the family in British legend. His lineage was illustrious, but his childhood was lonely. His father, Lord Randolph Churchill, was a rising political star, sharp, unpredictable, and already fading from ill health. His mother, Jenny Jerome, was an American beauty whose social magnetism dazzled London. Between their ambitions and affairs, Winston was left mostly in the care of a nurse he adored. That absence became his lifelong drive, a hunger to earn approval that would later shape his need for history's applause. At Harrow, Churchill was clever but undisciplined, with poor marks in Latin and math, but a love of English, history, and debate. He famously recited poetry while marching and memorized dates of battles. After 3 failed attempts, he passed into the Royal Military College at Sandhurst, graduating 8th in his class of cavalry officers, a sign of his latent brilliance when properly motivated. In uniform, he was restless for both glory and attention. Between 1895 and 1900, he blended war and journalism into a single career. He reported on Cuba's rebellion against Spain, fought on the Indian frontier, charged with lances at Omdurman in Sudan, and wrote vivid dispatches that sold newspapers across Britain. Each adventure was both risk and resume. He learned how danger sharpened prose, and how prose could build a myth. The defining episode came during the Boer War. While covering the conflict as a journalist, he was captured, escaped by scaling a prison wall, and trekked 300 miles through enemy territory to safety. Overnight, he became an imperial folk hero. At just 26, he returned to Britain a celebrity, and parlayed that fame into a seat in Parliament. The boy who once feared parental neglect had now forced the empire itself to notice him. Elected in 1900 as a Conservative, Churchill entered the House of Commons like a thunderclap, arrogant, articulate, and unwilling to stay silent. He quickly grew frustrated with party orthodoxy and, in 1904, did the unthinkable. He crossed the floor to join the Liberals. The betrayal scandalized his father's old allies, but Churchill claimed he was following principle over loyalty. "I ratted," he admitted cheerfully, "but I re-ratted on the right grounds." In the Liberal ranks, he found a home for his reformist streak. As Under-Secretary for the Colonies, he helped negotiate peace with the defeated Boers, granting them self-government, a rare gesture of imperial leniency. By 1908, as President of the Board of Trade, he worked with David Lloyd George on a wave of progressive social reforms: minimum wages, unemployment insurance, and labor exchanges. For the first time, Churchill saw the state not only as a shield of empire, but as an instrument of uplift. But reform bred enemies. When striking miners clashed with police in Tonypandy in 1910, Churchill sent in troops, a decision that earned him lifelong hatred from sections of the working class. To some, he was a ruthless elitist. To others, a pragmatic modernizer. Both were true. In 1911, he became First Lord of the Admiralty, effectively commander of Britain's navy. He foresaw that the next war would hinge on industry and oil. He pushed the fleet to convert from coal to petroleum, strengthened shipbuilding, and invested in naval aviation. When Europe slid toward conflict in 1914, Churchill quietly ordered the fleet to war readiness before Parliament had even declared war. When war came, Britain's navy was ready, a foresight that likely saved lives and the nation's prestige. When World War I erupted, Churchill was only 40, but already carried the confidence of a man twice his age. He threw himself into the naval war, directing operations, monitoring submarines, even visiting the front in person. But his restless energy soon turned disastrous. In 1915, Churchill conceived a plan to break the stalemate, an assault on the Dardanelles to knock the Ottoman Empire out of the war. The goal was strategic genius: open a sea route to Russia and relieve pressure on the Western Front. But the execution was catastrophe. The campaign at Gallipoli collapsed into chaos, with tens of thousands of Allied troops slaughtered on the beaches. The blame fell squarely on Churchill. Stripped of office, publicly humiliated, and branded reckless, he fell into despair. "I am finished," he told his wife Clementine. But even in disgrace, he sought redemption in action. He joined the army, commanding a battalion on the Western Front. Shellfire and mud replaced marble offices. Later, soldiers remembered that he refused special treatment, sharing their rations and risk. He painted watercolors in the trenches, the hobby that would later become therapy throughout his life. By war's end, Churchill's name was slowly recovering. He returned to politics in 1917 as Minister of Munitions, reorganizing factories and proving again that his administrative brilliance matched his rhetoric. The Great War had scarred him, but it had not broken him. He emerged more cautious, but also convinced that courage in failure was as noble as victory. Peace brought no stability. Between 1919 and 1939, Churchill's career was a pendulum, swinging between power and exile. As Secretary of State for War, he urged intervention in the Russian Civil War, warning that Bolshevism was a pestilence. When Britain tired of foreign entanglements, he was denounced as a warmonger. In 1924, he rejoined the Conservatives, declaring, "Anyone can rat, but it takes a certain amount of ingenuity to re-rat." Appointed Chancellor of the Exchequer, he made a fateful economic mistake, returning Britain to the gold standard. It strengthened the pound, but strangled exports, deepening unemployment. The decision haunted him and the nation alike. As the 1930s dawned, Churchill's political fortunes collapsed. He was out of office, out of favor, and increasingly isolated. But in exile, his voice found prophetic clarity. While Europe drifted toward appeasement, he warned that Hitler's Germany was rearming in violation of treaties. His warnings were dismissed as relics of a bygone imperial age. Newspapers mocked him. Colleagues avoided him. Yet he studied intelligence reports obsessively, tracking every ton of German steel and aircraft production. In 1938, as Neville Chamberlain returned from Munich declaring, "Peace for our time," Churchill thundered in Parliament. "You were given the choice between war and dishonor. You chose dishonor, and you will have war." History would soon prove him right. When war returned in 1939, Britain turned back to its old lion. Appointed First Lord of the Admiralty once more, Churchill was reinstated with the message, "Winston is back." After the disasters in Norway and the collapse of Chamberlain's government, he was appointed Prime Minister in May 1940, just as Hitler's armies surged across Western Europe. Britain stood alone. France had fallen. The United States was neutral. The Soviet Union had allied with Germany. Churchill's task was impossible: to rally a nation facing invasion. His speeches transformed dread into defiance. "We shall fight on the beaches. We shall never surrender." His oratory turned endurance into victory, long before victory arrived. The summer of 1940 brought the Blitz. German bombers darkened the skies over London for 57 nights. Churchill refused to flee to the countryside. He stood among the rubble, shaking hands, his cigar glowing amid the smoke. He told one reporter, "I was not the lion, but it fell to me to give the lion's roar." By 1941, Britain had survived the Battle of Britain and held its island fortress against the Axis tide. When Hitler invaded the Soviet Union and Japan attacked Pearl Harbor, the global chessboard changed overnight. Churchill forged uneasy alliances with Stalin, whom he despised, and Roosevelt, whom he adored. The Grand Alliance became the machinery of total war. Churchill traveled tirelessly, to Washington, Moscow, Cairo, Tehran, and Yalta, even as bombs still fell on London. His diplomacy blended charm and cunning. He drank champagne with Stalin and traded barbs with Roosevelt, once quipping that if he had to choose between communism and Nazism, he'd choose hell. Together, the three leaders plotted the destruction of the Axis powers, from D-Day's beaches to the atom's dawn. By 1945, victory was in sight. Yet Churchill's health was deteriorating. He suffered minor strokes, and exhaustion shadowed his famously jovial demeanor. When Germany finally surrendered, he walked among cheering crowds, yet privately wept. For him, war had always been both stage and purpose. Peace would again bring exile. The irony of Churchill's life was that he saved Britain, only to be voted out weeks later. In July 1945, the public chose Labour's Clement Attlee to rebuild the country. Churchill retreated to his beloved Chartwell estate to write his 6-volume History of the Second World War, for which he would later receive the Nobel Prize in Literature. Yet even in defeat, he shaped the new world. In a 1946 speech in Missouri, he coined the phrase Iron Curtain to describe the division of Europe, warning that a new struggle was replacing the one just won. He became once again the prophet in the wilderness. As Cold War tensions rose, his words gained gravity. He advocated Anglo-American unity, nuclear restraint, and, remarkably, reconciliation with Germany. His worldview was imperial, but his instincts were global. At 76, Churchill returned to Downing Street for a final term as Prime Minister. His body was frail, his memory fading, but his mind remained strategic. He sought détente with the Soviets and warned that the new atomic age demanded diplomacy as much as deterrence. Yet his cabinet increasingly governed around him. Strokes and exhaustion limited his presence. Still, he pushed Britain toward the nascent European project, foreseeing integration decades before it came. In 1955, he resigned, finally conceding that even lions must rest. The Queen offered him the Order of the Garter. He declined a dukedom, choosing instead to remain plain Mr. Churchill of Blenheim. In retirement, Churchill painted, wrote, and received a steady pilgrimage of admirers. Presidents, kings, and poets visited Chartwell to pay tribute. He saw his own myth solidify. The bulldog of Britain, the embodiment of courage, rhetoric, and will. Yet his private life was gentler. Afternoons painting seascapes, feeding swans, or watching films with his wife Clementine, his steadfast anchor for 6 decades. When he died, on January 24, 1965, 70 years to the day after his father's death, Britain stopped. Over 300,000 people filed past his coffin. The funeral procession down the Thames saw cranes dip in salute. The empire he had once defended was gone, but the world order he helped forge remained. Churchill's life defies simplification. He was an aristocrat who championed workers, a hero responsible for blunders, a warlord who preached peace, and a romantic trapped in the machinery of history. He believed in destiny, not as fate, but as duty. Success is not final, he once said. Failure is not fatal. It is the courage to continue that counts. That courage, through Gallipoli's shame, through the Blitz's terror, through the long winter of doubt, is what turned a man into a monument. His story is not one of perfection, but persistence. A century later, his voice still echoes, reminding us that history is written by those who refuse to stay silent. Thank you for watching. Subscribe for more deep dives into the world's incredible histories.